press. The military press, I found, is actually a very useful source of information on these types of issues. And I think that a significant variable here is the weak recovery from the 2007-2009 recession with high rates of unemployment all over Europe, and a feeling that arms exports that will be generated by the publicity of the intervention may help increase employment levels. The concept of military Keynesianism, by the way, is not something only confined to the US. The Europeans try to use that means too to increase their employment levels, and that would seem to be a significant factor in the decision to intervene. It's at least seen that way by military experts who've often been seeing this as kind of in the words of one military expert, a fighter plane demo. It's not a small factor here. There's a lot of money involved. A related issue concerns the budgetary politics of European states. As a result of the recession, many European states, most notably Britain, have had revenue shortfalls and a large budget deficit, leading to major budget cuts, and particularly in Britain, but elsewhere as well. There have been not only efforts to cut social programs, but also, surprisingly, the military. In Great Britain, there was a decommissioning of Britain's last aircraft carrier, the HMS Ark Royal, in 2010, and the scrapping of all naval aircraft, leaving Britain for the very first time in many decades with no naval aircraft at all. The British Navy has been using the intervention in Libya to argue against these cuts, that it was a mistake to cut the aircraft carriers and the naval aircraft, that Britain cannot field any aircraft carriers in this intervention, which makes them look bad vis-a-vis the French who can. And there's been widespread talk in the British media that the naval cuts had been a mistake and should be reversed. The Royal Air Force has been using this as well to argue against cuts to land-based airplanes. And so I think much of this also is being used by the militaries of the states involved, led by Britain in this case, to argue against cuts. And of course, I think the most important interest is oil. Libya is the 9th largest oil reserves in the world. And there was a great deal of talk in the oil press that concern that the uprising in Libya would endanger investments in that country. They'd endanger both fixed capital investments. They could be destroyed in a civil war. And also they'd endanger access to the oil as well. I should add the oil companies, for the most part, I think were just fine with Gaddafi. They had no problem with him at all. The problem was Gaddafi was no longer stable. He was seen as a loser. He was an outgoing figure. And in general, there's a long history that Western investors feel positively about interventions militarily by their home states. It is a stabilizing factor in their view. Just a small detail in studying the intervention in Kosovo, where there was no oil actually, and there was nothing of great importance in Kosovo. There was discussion in the business press about how there was a stock market rally at the beginning of the intervention, because investors loved the intervention as a demonstration effect of US power and as a protection for investments, not in Kosovo, because there weren't many investments there, but worldwide. And no doubt in Libya, where there really is valuable material in the ground, the incentive to intervene on the part of the business community, particularly the oil community, is even greater. And finally, there's the related issue not just of Libya, but of the whole Middle Eastern region. There is, of course, the Arab Spring. I'm running out of time here, I'm sorry, so I'll wrap it up as quickly as possible. There's the Arab Spring, as we all know, with overthrows of major Western allies, most notably Mubarak, and the dreaded possibility of instability in the Persian Gulf, and a feeling that the West had to demonstrate that it was not losing control in this crucial area. And Libya was where the demonstration was going to take place. That in spite of a seeming Middle East spinning out of control, the West can still exert military force like it could in the old days. Ironically enough, led, of course, by the top colonial powers from the past, Britain and France, to some extent Italy as well. And so I would see those, basically, as the major variable here. In terms of the long-term implications, I think that it will be a setback for international law because the intervention itself was unquestionably illegal. If you look at the Security Council resolutions authorizing action, UNSC 1970 and UNSC 1973, they only called for a no-fly zone to protect civilians. They did not call for regime overthrow, which obviously was the Western countries' motives all along. There was also a call for an arms embargo, clearly violated at least by France, also Qatar, and possibly other states. The War Powers Resolution of 1973 in the US was violated by President Obama, who did not get congressional authorization as required by the act. Very much a setback for international law. It's also a setback for weapons control. Notably, other countries looking at this incident, most notably North Korea, will say that there's no point in negotiating with the US and its allies. Gaddafi did that. He made the mistake of doing that. And look what happened to him. If Gaddafi had developed nuclear weapons, they never would have intervened against him. Again, look at North Korea. No intervention against North Korea. Why? Because they have nuclear weapons. That's why. The lesson to be learned is develop nuclear weapons as quickly as possible. A huge setback from the standpoint of non-proliferation. One that is going to have implications for many years to come. Then there's the question that has to be raised of what is the future for Libya? And will we have basically opened the proverbial Pandora's box of disorder in the country? That's a real possibility, and it must be acknowledged. There's a likelihood of Western ground forces, or at least ground forces, if not by NATO, authorized by the United Nations. That's, I'd say, a high probability. So we should not think of this as a short-term intervention. It's very likely to be a long-term intervention, possibly with ground combat. That can't be ruled out. And of course, it sets precedents for future interventions in the world, as well as higher military budgets. One cannot just think of the Libya intervention as a discrete event. It has larger implications. And the implication undoubtedly will be, if it is viewed as a success, and at least in the short term it's been viewed as a sensational success, one that no doubt Obama will use in the 2012 election, that Sarkozy will use in his re-election campaign. And this will set a precedent that military force is a risk-free and a good thing to do. It'll raise your popularity ratings if you're a president or prime minister. It will satisfy. Many intellectuals will otherwise be critical of you. It'll be good for raising military expenditures for the armies involved. It will be a win for everybody, until, of course, we have another Iraq-like catastrophe, and we see the negative effects of the whole thing. Thank you very much.